I don't know about the rest of you, but it's really uncomfortable listening to a long introduction. And so I'm going to make a note to cut that in at least by a third before I send it out to anyone else ever again, so that we can actually get to the discussion that we want to have today. It's my honor to be here with you. To my friends, my Richland 2 friends, and I've been trying to spot faces from friends from other districts to see if any of you I know personally, but for those of you working in this area of diversity, inclusion, and equity, it's just an honor. I'm always happy to be with others who are fellow soldiers in this work, because it's hard work and it takes a lot of intentionality and determination to make it move forward. And sometimes when we're thinking about, especially when we're thinking about dismantling racist practices, we know that it is work that moves in slow steps, and sometimes at a very slow pace, but nevertheless, it takes people moving it to make it happen, so that we have to be very intentional about the work that we're doing. I had a few moments to spend to look at some of the plans that were in the file, to see some of the work that you're already doing. Loved some of the ideas that I heard just a few moments ago discussed about how you're moving forward with those plans, with diversifying the libraries, and in particular looking to move that into classroom libraries. That's something that we want to see done here in Richland District 2, to make sure there are diverse texts available for our students. And I know the work that is being done by Mr. Sherman and his students, and they have been working for months. And so that's not new work, but he's beginning, I think, to see the benefit of some of that work of getting with your students and sharing conversation and being able to move forward. So I looked at what you're taught, what the theme is for today, and that's the dismantling racist practices. And I thought, wow, that's a lot to take on. But the first thought that I had is that this is something that really requires a change in mindsets, because we live in South Carolina. All of us are South Carolina school districts, and we have a history that we cannot ignore in South Carolina. There are still a lot of educational professionals who don't believe that racist practices exist in education in South Carolina, and not in our school systems, and certainly not in my school, and certainly not in my classroom. And so when I think about what needs to happen, I think about how those mindsets need to change, and say nothing about the racist practices that we see in other systems beside education, in the police and law enforcement systems, and healthcare systems, in the digital divide that we're all so keenly aware of, just coming off of being quarantined and at home and having to do school from at home. So that shift in mindsets is something that is required. And when you think about that, I approach it almost as a rolling process. We hire in Richland 2 between 200 and 500 new teachers every year, depending on the year. And so it's a constant work of helping new teachers to our district come in to understand the culture, the values of this district, while at the same time trying to reach teachers who have been here to make sure that they are understanding of the work and are continuing in the line of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So at the same time that we are evaluating systems, we are trying to get staff to acknowledge that systems need to be evaluated. I hope that in these other school districts, you have brighter news to be able to share with me to say, oh, we're already past that, we're already doing it. And if so, I'm going to say, okay, tell me what you did so that we can get there as well. We're starting that process, but it is work to get it. And one of the obstacles that I run into a lot is just getting people to acknowledge the current status. I used to, when I did professional development with teachers, ask people to raise their hand if they were biased. And I stopped doing that because I would only have about half of the room raise their hand. And so now I go in and I say, look, we're all biased. And I explain what I mean by that and explain the implicit biases. But I still have people who reject the notion that they have any implicit biases. And so that takes work And that takes conversation, and that takes going back over ground more than one time to help people move along I refer to it sometimes as tilling the soil, loosening it up enough to be able to plant a seed of equity into it. I've got to turn that soil over to get you to start thinking about, well, maybe something I'm doing could be done better. And when I still run into people who say to me, but I'm colorblind, I treat everybody the same, I have to stop and explain, but that's not a good thing. I need you to see the color of your beautiful students in your classroom. I need you to affirm each one in their individual identity for who they are and for what they're doing and for what they contribute. And then be inclusive of them all. Use that diversity as a strength to build your classroom, to help move everyone forward. And so that's another place where I think mindsets have to be adjusted for us to continue this work. And, you know, in South Carolina, maybe more so than any other place in the country, we have to come to grips with the history of slavery and the continuing impacts of hundreds of years of enslavement and discrimination and segregation that's taken place right here in our state. We have to stop being unwilling to say that slavery has had an impact and continues to impact what happens in our school systems. I try very hard to not ever get angry about things, because out of anger, I don't process well and I don't do well in trying to communicate. But I had an occasion to be talking about diversity away from my school district. It didn't involve any school district. It did involve an educational institution. And in talking about the diversity, I had a white woman come up after me after the discussion and say, I don't understand why you're always talking about diversity. I didn't own any slaves. And it took me aback, because I thought, okay, how can I, in public, in a kind and respectful manner, explain to someone that you don't have to be the person to have physically enslaved people to benefit from the system of slavery that existed? And how do I get you to understand that even though I was never enslaved, as a Black woman, I still suffer detriment from slavery? I did the best that I could with it under the circumstances, but it brought home to me how clear the problem is for some people to be able to accept that we are continuing to suffer through some of the negative consequences from slavery. So just like recovery programs require addicts to be able to admit first that they are addicts before they move forward through steps to on their road to recovery, I think in some ways we have to be willing to admit that there are problems before we can really move forward on that road to recovery. I carry in my phone with me everywhere I go a picture of my great-grandmother's tombstone. My family is from South Carolina, so my roots, as far as I know and can trace, are in South Carolina. And in Clarendon County, South Carolina, my great-grandmother Helen Reagan Richburg was born in 1865. And that's an important date because, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation was 1863. And we celebrate Juneteenth when notification to enslaved people started to come out that you were no longer enslaved, was in 1865. This is my great grandmother. That means there are only 2 generations between me and her. She was born in 1865. And so in some respects, we think about the legacy of racism as being something that was a long, long time ago. But in my family, it was 3 generations for me that my grandmother was born. And so when I think about what the generation before her, they were enslaved people in this state. That's just not that long ago. And there are still ripples that come out from that time through me to my children, and I am sure now to my grandson as well. But it's important for us to remember that we are just not that far away, and that we are still suffering under practices, under systems, under institutions that were put into place either during enslavement or during Black codes or Jim Crow laws or segregation that are still in place today. And our Black and brown students who are in our school systems don't fare as well. We know that there could be as many as 2 generations of wealth building for white students and their families that took place before Black students even got off of a raised line to start trying to generate wealth. And we know that we have things set up in society, whether it's profiling by police or police brutality, that make it more difficult for students of color to be able to move forward. And so we have to work hard on getting people to accept that there is a legacy that needs to be addressed, and then to figure out what is the priority? Where do I need to start? How do I need to dismantle those systems that are potentially holding our students back? And one of the other things, and it's the last comment that I'll make, about mindsets and the need to change mindset, is I run into so many people who feel like if I'm in the dominant race and I open my arms up to allow more people in, especially people of color, into whatever my thing is, whether that is into an accelerated program, whether it's a gifted and talented program, whether it's a magnet program, that if I have that control over who gets into that program, whether that's by standardized test scores or interviews by non-diverse panels, whatever the means might be, that if I open that up, I'm somehow losing power. And I need all of my white allies to help me explain to my white friends that you don't lose power by opening your arms, you gain power. You're not losing anything by opening up programs and activities to students who can benefit from them. Instead, what you're doing is gaining. But for as long as we continue to view that as a loss to the person who has the reins over it, it's very difficult to make those changes happen. And so I think when I summarize how do we go about dismantling racist systems, I think we have to start with dismantling mindsets and attitudes that deny those systems exist. And then slowly but surely start working through the process to go through, figure out where we're going to start and to make a start. One of the things that I enjoyed so about looking at the individual school plans that were available is everybody was starting someplace. And it wasn't the same place, and it doesn't have to be the same place, but everyone is starting someplace to start conversations, to start making a difference, to start getting people to see that it can be done differently, can be done in a different way. So I don't know if you'd like to do questions and answers at this time, and I didn't time myself to see how much time is left within the time you have on your agenda, but I'm happy to answer questions or listen to comments or concerns.